Wyoming Territory, 1876. The wind cut sharp through the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains, snapping through the grass like a whip when Colt Granger found the broken-down wagon. He had not planned on stopping. He never did. But the sight of an overturned wheel and a woman kneeling by it, her skirts stained and hair wild from the wind, made his horse slow before he even touched the reins. Something about the way she crouched beside the wreck, arms around two trembling children, made something twist hard in his chest. She looked up when he dismounted. Her eyes were wary. Her face was smudged, tired, but she did not flinch, just stood slowly and pulled the children closer. "We do not want trouble," she said, voice steady but low. "We just need to get to Red Rock." Colt stopped a good 10 feet away, hands out. "I am not trouble, ma'am, just a cowboy. Saw your wagons down." The little boy, maybe about 8, pressed his face into her skirts. The girl, younger, stared at him with big brown eyes and clutched a cloth doll with no arms. "You alone?" Colt asked carefully. "My name's Mayra Caldwell," she said, chin lifting. "These are my children, Delia and Dane. Their father left us in Casper, said he was coming back with help. That was 4 days ago." Colt exhaled through his nose. He had known men like that, men who ran when things got hard. He looked at the wheel cracked clean through and the slope behind it, deep ruts in the mud. They were lucky the wagon had not flipped entirely. "You all right?" he asked, softer now. Mayra's jaw tightened. "We will be." Colt nodded once. He did not say she looked like she had not eaten in a day. He did not say the boy was pale and shivering. He just turned toward his horse, pulled down his pack, and walked back. "I have bread, dried meat, water. You can eat while I fix the axle." She hesitated, then nodded. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, Colt had the wagon righted and the wheel patched enough to get them moving. He had worked quiet, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the sweat streaking dirt across his forearms. The children had eaten and fallen asleep in the back, curled together like pups. Mayra stood beside him as he packed away his tools. "You did not have to help. I know." She watched him for a moment. "Why did you?" Colt looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were the color of dusk, deep and tired but still steady. She was no delicate thing. She had gotten those children over the mountains alone. She had not cried, not once. "Because no one helped my ma," he said finally. "When my pa left." Mayra said nothing, but her shoulders eased just a little. Colt tied his pack back to the saddle. "Red Rock's still a long ride. You cannot take that wagon over the next pass in the dark. I cannot sleep out here with the children. You do not have to." He nodded to a stand of trees. "I have a lean-to, small fire. You can rest there, safe." She did not answer right away. Then, "All right." He rode slowly beside the wagon, guiding them through the thinning trees. The lean-to was just canvas rigged over a frame, but the fire pit was dry and there was wood stacked. Colt helped the children down first, gentle and quiet. Delia clung to Mayra's skirt. Dane followed him with wide eyes. "You always live alone?" Dane asked. Colt glanced at him. "Mostly. Do you get lonely?" Colt's hand stilled on the saddle strap. "Sometimes." Mayra's eyes met his across the fire as night settled around them. She did not look away. They shared stew from his tin pot, the broth warm and thin but enough. The children nodded off again early. Colt offered them the bedrolls. Mayra tried to protest, but he shook his head. "I have slept colder places." When she laid them down, he stepped away, giving her space. He sat near the fire, back to a tree, the stars sharp overhead. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. "You should sleep," he said, not looking up. "I cannot, not yet." She sat across the fire. The flicker lit one side of her face, casting the other in shadow. "You do not talk much," she said after a while. "Never had reason to. You never married." His jaw tightened. "Was not fit for it." "Who told you that?" Colt shrugged. "Life." Mayra watched him. "You fixed my wagon, fed my children, gave us shelter. You call that unfit?" He looked at her then, and there was something raw in his eyes, like he wanted to believe her but could not quite. "People do not stay," he said. "Not when they see what is under the dust." Mayra's voice was steady. "Maybe you have been looking at the wrong people." The fire snapped between them. Around them the woods were still. The children slept. The stars burned. Colt said nothing more, but something in his chest shifted. The next morning he rode ahead while she followed with the wagon. The trail narrowed into switchbacks, and when one of the wheels caught in a rut, Colt was already there, lifting and bracing until she could steer it free. "You do this for every stranger you meet?" she asked once they stopped to rest. "No," he said simply. Later, when Dane coughed hard and could not stop, Colt gave him some of the pine syrup he carried in his pack. Mayra watched him spoon it into the boy's mouth with careful hands. "You carry that for yourself?" she asked. "No, for others. In case." Each day they traveled, Mayra seemed to walk closer beside him. Each night they shared the fire, sometimes words, sometimes just silence. Colt found he did not mind the quiet when she was in it. The fifth night out, she leaned her head back against the wagon wheel and looked up at the stars. "I used to think I had to be strong for the children, that if I cracked, everything would fall apart." Colt sat beside her. "You are strong." She turned to him. "So are you." He looked down at his hands. "I do not feel it, I see it." Colt's heart beat hard in his chest. Her hand brushed his. He did not pull away. "I do not know what comes next," she said. He looked at her, eyes honest. "I do not either, but I know I want to be near you." "And the children?" Mayra nodded once, slow. "I want that too," Colt swallowed. "I never thought I could have something like that, be worth loving." She reached up, touched his cheek, rough with stubble. "You already are." And for the first time in years, Colt believed it. He leaned in. She did too. The kiss was soft, quiet, and steady, like them, and it felt like home. The road into Red Rock dipped into a wide valley ringed with cottonwoods, their leaves gold and trembling in the wind. The town was smaller than Mayra remembered from the map, little more than a line of clapboard buildings along a single dusty lane. A church steeple leaned slightly east, and above the general store, a faded sign creaked in the breeze. Colt rode ahead to scout the livery. Mayra, seated beside Delia at the front of the wagon, watched him dismount and speak with the stable hand, his hat tipped low, that same quiet way about him. Dane sat behind her, head resting against the crate of flour sacks, his cough lighter than the day before. "He said there's a woman here keeps a boarding house," Colt told her when he returned. "Takes in families, might be a place for you and the children." Mayra studied him. "What about you?" "I'll sleep in the loft at the livery. I've done it before." Delia tugged her hand. "Mama, I'm hungry." Mayra nodded, brushing the girl's cheek. "We'll eat soon, sweetheart." Colt helped them settle in the boarding house, 2 rooms with thin walls and a stove that clanked when it warmed. The woman who ran it, Mrs. Lister, was soft-spoken and didn't ask questions. Mayra unpacked slowly, folding what little they had half-mended clothes, a Bible, the tin cup Dane refused to drink from unless he could hold it himself. That night, Colt knocked at the kitchen door with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "From the grocer," he said. "For the children." Inside was a small wedge of cheese, a jar of apple preserves, and a cloth bundle of sugar biscuits. Mayra stared at it for a long moment before saying, "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She stepped back to let him in, and he stood awkwardly near the stove while she sliced the cheese. "Did you grow up in a place like this?" she asked. Colt shook his head. "Near Medicine Bow, cattle country. Wind never stopped blowing. You had family there. My uncle raised me after my ma passed." He glanced down. "He was hard, never said much, taught me work was better than words." Mayra passed him a biscuit, the sugar melted into its edges. "You don't talk like a man who thinks work is enough." "I used to. Not anymore," he looked at her then. "Not since I met you." The children's laughter echoed faintly down the hallway, and for a moment neither spoke. "I've been thinking," Mayra said, setting her cup down. "I could take in sewing. Mrs. Lister says the women here send to Cheyenne for lace and cuffs. I know how to stitch clean." Colt nodded. "That'd be good. And the children could walk to the schoolhouse come spring." Colt turned his cup in his hands. "You want to stay?" "I want to build something steady," she said. "They've had too much shifting already." He studied her, the firelight catching the strands of hair that had slipped from her braid. "And you?" She met his eyes. "I want you in it if you want to be." His voice dropped low. "You sure?" "I've spent enough years not asking for what I needed, I'm sure." He crossed to her then, slow, like he was afraid the moment might break. But it didn't. Her hands found his, rough and warm, and she leaned into him without hesitation. Later, he walked her to her door. She stood in the frame, one hand on the latch. "You'll be here in the morning?" she asked. "I'll be here," he said, and he was. He came by each day after his work at the livery, bringing stories from the street, sometimes just standing in the kitchen while she hemmed sleeves or scrubbed the basin. The children began to wait for him by the window, Dane with a toy horse carved from scrap wood, Delia with a ribbon he'd brought from the mercantile. One evening, Colt arrived with a wooden crate under his arm. "Found this behind the stables," he said. "Thought maybe the children could grow something come spring." Mayra lifted the lid. Inside were onion bulbs, wrapped in burlap. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "You think that far ahead?" He nodded. "I want to." She didn't say anything, just reached for his hand and held it. Long and steady. And when the first snow came, Colt was already living in the room beside hers, his boots by the door, his coat hanging from the peg. The children no longer asked when he'd return. They knew he would. Mayra sat with him one night as the wind howled outside, the windows rattling in their frames. His arm was around her shoulders, her fingers laced with his beneath the quilt. "You still think you're not the kind of man women stay for?" she asked, her voice soft against the hush of the stove. He looked down at her, eyes full of something he hadn't known how to name before. "Not anymore," he said, and he meant it. February came with deep snows and brittle skies, and the wind no longer wandered, it howled straight down the alleys of red rock, curling through cracks in window panes and under doors. The boarding house held together with coal stoves and thick quilts, and still Mayra woke in the dark with her feet cold beneath the blankets. Colt had taken to rising before daylight. He'd returned from the livery with the scent of hay and frost clinging to his coat, his hands red from breaking ice in the troughs. Sometimes Dane would rise early too, trailing behind him in oversized mittens, determined to help. Mayra let him, though she kept his scarf wrapped high and his boots stuffed with wool. One morning, Colt came in with a length of rough pine under his arm. "I figured Dane might like a proper sled," he said, setting it near the hearth. Mayra wiped her hands and looked it over, noting the notched runners and hand-carved crosspiece. "You made this," he shrugged. "Had time in the evenings. You didn't sleep much last night, didn't need to." She studied him. "You worry more than you let on." Colt's eyes flicked up. "It's not just you and the children anymore. Feels different now." Mayra ran her fingers down the edge of the wood. "Feels steadier." Colt leaned against the doorframe, his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't left him yet. "Mrs. Lister said the blacksmith's looking for help with the spring shoeing. I rode over yesterday." Mayra folded the dishcloth slowly. "You thinking of taking it, if it means I can stay close, make something that lasts? I'm tired of drifting." She met his gaze, steady and quiet. "Then don't drift." Colt crossed the room and took her hand, his voice low. "I never thought I'd want to plant roots, but I do, with you." She nodded once, fingers tightening around his. "Then plant them." By mid-March, the snow began to thaw in patches, revealing the churned-up mud beneath. Children trailed through town with tin pails and wet hems, and the schoolteacher began collecting names for the coming term. Mayra stitched new collars for Dane and Delia, her needle moving fast in the evenings while Colt sat nearby, sanding down the last of the sled's rough edges. One night, while the children slept and the stove glowed low, Mayra reached for the folded letter beside the sewing tin. "I never answered this," she said. Colt looked up. "What is it?" "My sister in Illinois. She wrote last summer, asked if I'd come back. Said I could stay with her and her husband, help with their shop. And you didn't go." I told myself I couldn't leave until we got through the mountains, but the truth is, I didn't want to disappear into someone else's life again. She opened the letter, touched the worn crease with her thumb. "When I was married, I did everything the way I was told. I followed every plan someone else made." Colt watched her carefully. "You don't have to anymore." She folded the letter and set it back in the tin. "No, I don't." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You built something here, not just for the children, for yourself." She looked at him then, something unspoken settling between them. "With you." That Sunday they walked to the church together. The pews were half full, the windows fogged with breath and light. Mayra wore a shawl stitched from leftover bits of wool, dyed deep rust and blue. Delia sat between them, her feet swinging above the floorboards, while Dane leaned against Colt's side, his eyes bright with questions he never quite asked. After the hymns, Reverend Halcombe greeted them at the door. "Good to see you again, Colt," he said, offering a hand. Colt hesitated, then shook it. "It's been a while." The Reverend glanced at Mayra and the children. "You found your place then?" Colt nodded. "I have." That night, Colt brought home a small tin box from the general store. "It's not silver," he said, setting it on the table, "but it's steady." Mayra opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, round, and warmed by his palm. She didn't speak for a long moment, just brushed her thumb over the band. "Is this what you want?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes full of something clear and quiet. "Yes." Colt stepped forward. "Then I'll build the rest of my life around that." Outside, the wind had finally stilled. The river was beginning to break free from the ice. And in the small house, warmed by work and time, they stood side by side, no longer waiting to be worthy, just choosing and being chosen in return. Spring came slow to Red Rock. The river thawed in fits and starts, ice breaking into dark channels that glimmered beneath the midday sun. Mud clung to boots and wagon wheels, and the scent of thawed earth settled over the town like a promise. Colt stood behind the blacksmith's forge, shirt damp with sweat, smoke curling from the iron he shaped. His hands no longer trembled when he lifted the hammer. The weight of it felt right now, like it belonged to a man who'd chosen where to stand. That night, Mayra brought a basket down to the smithy. Inside were 2 loaves, crust brown just right, and a jar of pickled beans. She waited until he finished setting a shoe on a draft mare, then stepped forward, brushing soot from his brow with her thumb. "You've been working too late," she said. Colt leaned against the rail. "I lose track when it's quiet." "You always do that when something's on your mind." He didn't deny it. "The wedding's only a week off." She tilted her head. "Does that worry you?" "No," he said, "but it's a strange thing knowing something good's coming. I keep waiting for the ground to shift." Mayra set the basket down and took his hand, the one still stained with ash. "It already shifted, Colt. You just held your ground when it did." He turned her hand over, calloused fingers tracing the skin beneath her wrist. You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day? If I'd just ridden past?" She shook her head. "No, because you didn't." Colt's voice was rough. "I nearly did. But you didn't," she said. "And that's who you are." They stood there a long while, the forge cooling behind them, the night wind stirring the dust at their feet. In the following days, Mayra hemmed her best dress, one she'd brought all the way from Missouri before her life had turned. She gathered wild yarrow from the edge of the woods with Delia, while Dane practiced writing his full name on scraps of paper Colt brought home from the smithy. Mrs. Lister offered her parlor for the vows, and the women of the boarding house strung ribbons through the rafters. Colt trimmed his beard and wore a clean white shirt, the buttons stiff with starch. When he saw Mayra step into the room, her hair pinned with sprigs of green, he couldn't speak right away. "You look like the first day of summer," he said at last. She smiled, but it was quiet. "You look like someone who's finally standing still." The vows were spoken with steady voices. Colt held her hands like they were the only thing anchoring him. When the Reverend asked if he would honor and keep her, Colt didn't hesitate. "I already do," he said. The kiss was not long, not loud. But it was full, certain. Afterward, the children ran through the yard with ribbons trailing from their sleeves. Colt lifted Delia once, spinning her in a slow circle, her laughter bright against the soft light. Dane helped pour lemonade into tin cups, careful not to spill. Later that evening, as the guests trickled home and the sun streaked gold across the floorboards, Mayra sat beside Colt on the steps of the boarding house. Her head rested against his shoulder, and the silence between them was easy. "You used to flinch when anyone looked too close," she said. Colt nodded. "I didn't think I had anything worth seeing." And now he looked out toward the dipping ridge where the last light clung to the trees. "Now I know I do." She reached for his hand. "Not because I told you." "No," he agreed. "Because you stayed long enough for me to see it myself." They didn't need more words than that. The wind passed soft through the cottonwoods. A pair of mourning doves settled on the roof above. Colt turned toward her, pressed his lips to her temple. And for the first time in all his wandering years, he felt still. He had not become someone new. He had just stopped running from who he already was. The first calf was born just past dusk, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Colt had gone out to the pasture alone, lantern swinging from his hand, the air still sharp with late frost. He returned with his jacket streaked and his voice low with something like wonder. "She's small, but strong." Took to standing quicker than most. Mayra wiped her hands on her apron and met him at the door. "Is she nursing?" He nodded. "Stubborn about it, but she'll catch on." Mayra stepped around him, reaching for the shawl on the peg. "I'll see her." Colt caught her wrist gently. "Let her settle. You'll have time in the morning." She looked at his hand, then back at him. "It still surprises me how things grow here, even after all that cold." He let go. "Doesn't surprise me anymore, not with you in the middle of it." Mayra didn't answer, but her shoulders softened. She turned toward the stove, where the beans had cooked down to a thick stew. Delia stirred in her sleep from the bedroom, and Dane mumbled something unintelligible before quieting again. Colt moved to the wash basin and rolled up his sleeves. "You remember the man who used to run the livery?" he asked. "Mr. Baines." "Only in passing." "His widow still lives up the ridge. I saw her in town today. She's been alone since the autumn." Mayra looked over. "She needs help, not sure, but she asked if you might visit. Said she heard you made good preserves." Mayra wiped her hands dry. "I could take her some of the apple butter. It's no trouble. She's got a niece staying with her, about Delia's age, maybe a little older." Mayra nodded once, thoughtful. "Delia could use a friend. She's been talking to her doll more than usual." They ate quiet that night, the kind of quiet that sits easy. Outside, the wind had dropped, and the sky stretched clear and dark. The next morning, Colt hitched the wagon and rode with Mayra and the children up past the ridge. The trail was soft with new melt, and the grass beneath the trees was beginning to green. The Baines homestead sat low in a fold of the hill, its porch sagging but the chimney still steady. The widow was smaller than Mayra expected, with thick gray hair pinned in a knot and eyes sharp enough to catch most things before they were said. She met them with a look that wasn't quite welcome, but not refusal either. "You brought the boy too," she said, eyeing Dane. "He's good company," Mayra answered. The widow's niece peeked through the door, her hair in two tight braids. Delia stepped forward without being prompted. "I'm Delia," she said. "Do you like playing with chalk?" The girl nodded slowly. "Sometimes." "Good," Delia said. "I brought some." The two wandered off before anyone had the chance to say more. Mayra handed over the jar of apple butter, and the widow took it without comment, though she examined the lid like she was checking the seal herself. "You teach them proper?" she asked, glancing toward the children. "I do my best," Mayra said. The woman's mouth twitched. "Good." Colt helped repair a loose shutter, and by the time he was done, the widow had invited them to stay for biscuits. It wasn't a warm invitation, but it was solid. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender. As they rode home, Delia leaned her head against Mayra's arm. "She has a cat with 3 legs," she said. "But it still jumps on the window," Mayra smiled. "That's so." She said it got caught in a trap, but it lived. She feeds it chicken bones. Dane looked up at Colt. "Can we get a cat?" Colt raised a brow. "You planning to feed it?" Dane considered. "Only if it's missing a leg," Colt chuckled, the sound low and rare. "We'll see." By early summer, the garden behind the boarding house was pushing up shoots. Mayra knelt over the rows in the morning light, palms rough with soil. Colt built a fence to keep out the deer, and Dane helped drive the posts, hammering with more enthusiasm than aim. The blacksmith offered Colt a share in the shop, and he accepted it with quiet certainty. Mayra stitched new curtains for the front windows, her fingers steady even when the thread tangled. One evening, as the sun settled behind the hills and the porch boards warmed beneath their bare feet, Mayra handed Colt a folded cloth. "What's this?" "I added a pocket to your work shirt," she said. "You keep losing your chalk." He opened it, ran a thumb along the seam. "Didn't think you noticed." "I notice everything you do." He reached for her then, not with urgency, but with the kind of purpose that comes from knowing something won't be taken away. They stood in the doorway a long while, the children asleep inside, the wind carrying the scent of turned earth and lilac. Later that night, Colt lay beside her, one hand resting on the curve of her hip. "You ever think about Missouri?" he asked. "Sometimes." "But not with longing." "You miss anything?" She turned to face him. "There's nothing there I'd trade for this. Not the quiet, not the work, not you." His breath caught. "I never thought I'd be a man someone chose." "You didn't have to be," she said. "You just had to stop running." His fingers brushed her cheek. "I'm here now. I know." They fell asleep with the window open, the night air sweet and still. The house creaked in the wind, but it was the sound of settling, not shifting. The kind of sound a home makes when it knows it's being lived in. Years passed. Delia and the widow's niece stayed close, chasing chickens through the yard and stringing daisies into their braids. Dane outgrew his boots twice in a season, and Colt built him a bench to sit on while he was measured. Mayra took in more work than she could finish some weeks, and still managed to read by lamplight at the end of each day. They did not grow rich, but they grew full. The house they moved into had a wide porch and a stove that burned hot through the coldest nights. Colt built shelves for Mayra's jars, and Mayra planted lilacs along the fence. The children laughed more than they cried. The work was hard. The days were honest, And through it all they loved quietly, deeply, without question, together. Always.